Jnanam Jneyam Parijñāta Trividha Karmachodana Karanam Karma Karteti Trividaha Karma Sangragaha. The 18th Shloka of the 18th chapter is a wonderful exposition on the art and science of actions. After having completed covering the topic of Ishvare Kartrita Buddhihi, ascribing doership to the Paramatma, in the first part of the 18th chapter, from Shlokas 1 to 17, Krishna now starts on from the 18th Shloka on this very interesting analysis of actions. We get to understand the nature of action, the life cycle of action, the components of action, for the purpose of cultivating sattva guna and for the purpose of carrying out right actions. As we all know, the central theme of the Gita is all about doing right actions, all about taking the right decisions, all about making right choices. Krishna now, in the 18th shloka and from the shloka onwards, brings together all the key topics we discovered so far throughout the 18 chapters, puts them together for our sake, and gives us a very vivid account on the science and art of actions. Jnanam Jneyam Parijñāta Trividha Karmachodana Karanam Karma Katteti Trividaha Karma Sangragaha. Krishna is listing out 6 factors here, and he groups them into 2. Jnanam Jneyam Parijñāta Trividha Karmachodana. Karmachodana, the impetus, the inducement, the incitement for any action. What are the factors that induce, that motivate any action? We all keep performing actions. Life is all about actions. We are constantly doing something or the other. Have we ever reflected on what are the components that goes into this action? What are the motivators? What induces action? What is that compels us to act the way we act? What are the compelling factors? The inducements for any action. So in the first part, Krishna takes up the topic of the 3 factors, Trividha Karmachodana. The 3 factors that form the motivation for any action. What are these 3 factors? Jnanam, Jneyam, Parijñāta. Jnanam, simply translated, it can mean knowledge. Jneyam, object of knowledge. Parijñāta, the knower. All these 3 are the factors, the triad of factors that are responsible for motivating any action, inciting any action. Karanam Karma Katteti Trividaha Karma Sangragaha. Karma Sangraha. Sangraha is accumulation. The 3 factors that come together, that accumulate to constitute what we can call work, action. The first part is the triad of motivators. The second part, the triad that constitutes the very act itself, the very work that we perform. What are the 3 components, the 3 factors? Karanam. Karanam, the instruments of action. Karanam, karma. Karma, the very act that is being performed. And karta, the doer. All three put together constitute the very work, the very act that is performed, Krishna says. Now, between the two, the most important part is the first part for any action. What incites any action? What is the motivation for any action? Jnanam, Jneyam, Parijñāta. Who is the Parijñāta? The knower. Who is the knower? The knower is the indwelling soul. The Jivatma, Krishna calls the Jivatma the Parijñāta. The one who knows, the knower. Incidentally, because the Jivatma is the knower, the Jivatma is also the doer. Because the Jivatma is the doer, the Jivatma is also the experiencer. Jnata, Karta, Bhokta. The Jivatma is the Parijñāta. And Jnanam, we have to understand this Jnanam very well. Jnanam has the root Jna Avabodhane, to know. We can translate Jnanam as knowledge, but just knowledge alone will not do justice to the word Jnana. Jnanam can refer to three different things. Jnanam can refer to Jnapti Jnanam. Jnapti Jnanam is awareness, consciousness. There is no content in this knowing. It is just awareness, consciousness. Jnapti Jnanam, knowing without content. Jnanam can refer to the substrate of consciousness. The substrate of consciousness, Jnanam Asti Asmi Iti. The substrate of consciousness, which essentially is the substance. The Jivatma is a substrate of consciousness. And it is not just consciousness, it also possesses consciousness. Therefore, Jnanam can also refer to Vritti Jnanam. Jnanam that reveals something to the knower. There is a subject, the knowing subject, the Atman. There is an object to be known, and then there is something that reveals the object to the subject. What is that which reveals? It is Vritti Jnanam. Jnanam which has content. We have seen earlier when we understood the nature of the Jivatma. The Jivatma is said to be of the nature of consciousness. Jivatma is said to be the essential nature, Swarupa of an Atman is consciousness, Jnana. That is why Jivatma is Jnana Swarupa. Jivatma is not just consciousness, it also possesses consciousness. It is also Jnana Gunaka. That is why in the 13th chapter we discussed this. There are two types of Jnana of the Jivatma. Dharmik Jnana, Dharma Bhuta Jnana. Dharmik Jnana is the substance. Dharma Bhuta Jnana is the attribute. To understand this easily, we can take the example of a flame and its luminosity. A flame and its luminosity are inseparable. Both are of the same nature. Dharmik Jnana is like the flame, the substance. It is self-revealing. The Atman is self-revealing. Swayam Prakashatva, they say. Self-revealing. There is nothing else needed. The awareness that I am the being. Self-revealing. The Atman reveals itself. Therefore, it is Swayam Prakasha. It is Dharmik Jnana. Dharmi is substance in Sanskrit. The luminosity of the flame is its attribute, which is Dharma Bhuta Jnana. The luminosity, what is the function of Dharma Bhuta Jnana? It is to reveal everything outside to the Atman. The Atman needs knowledge that can reveal everything to it. The external world of objects is revealed to the Atman through this attribute of consciousness, Dharma Bhuta Jnana. Here, when we look at action, the motivators of action, Krishna is talking about the Dharma Bhuta Jnana. the knowledge that reveals the external world. Now, this knowledge which reveals the external world to the Atman undergoes contraction and expansion. In samsara, it is contracted. Based on the karma of the Jivatma, based on the baggage of samskaras, the jnana, the dharma bhuta jnana, the attribute of consciousness of the Atman shrinks, contracts. Greater the contraction, lower is the level of the living being. For a stone, this dharma bhuta jnana is totally contracted. Whereas for Brahma, it expands, soars, and mukti is nothing but soaring, expansion of this jnana. It becomes infinite in the state of moksha. That is the reason why even within human beings, everyone is at a different level of jnana because of one's own karma. Depending on one's karma and the constitution of karma, whether depending on how sattvic one is, how rajasic one is, how tamasic one is, the jnana, the dharma bhuta jnana contracts or expands. It is sattva guna that helps the expansion of dharma bhuta jnana. Dharma bhuta jnana, the consciousness, the knowledge of the Atman, the way it operates is it operates through the mind, through the manas, through the buddhi of the Atman, then through the indriyas, reaches out to the external world and then reveals the external world to the Atman. When we say perception, when we say inference, when we say discrimination, they are all different states of this dharma bhuta jnana, of the different states of this consciousness operating through the internal organs of manas, buddhi and indriyas. It is very important. Why sattva guna has to be cultivated? Because this knowledge has to soar, has to expand. Without sattva guna, rajas and tamas wields this knowledge. Rajas constricts this knowledge. It is sattva that unveils this knowledge, helps expand this knowledge. That is when our perspective expands. We get to see no reality. This parijñata, Krishna calls the Jivatma Parijñata because the Parijñata is the Jivatma who knows, who is the knower, who is the nature of the knowledge and possesses knowledge which can expand and contract depending on its own karma. Jnanam, Jneyam, Parijñata. Trividha, Karma Chodana. All three put together constitute the motivating factors for any action. Now, let's understand how the life cycle of any action works. Right from the birth of the action until how it actually progresses. Krishna takes a very scientific approach to understanding the life cycle of an action. What is the starting point? What is step one of the birth of an action, the commencement of an action? Step one is the process of perceiving an object, an external object. The birth of any action starts with the process of perceiving. There is an object outside. Now, the process of having the indriyas, having seen, heard, touched, felt, tasted, any of these activities, having done any of these activities, then records, then sends a report to the mind. This is the process of perception. I see an object, the process of seeing, the indriyas sees and then sends a report to the mind of the object. Or I taste an object, a report is sent to the mind. So this is the process of perception. The various indriyas using various faculties send a report of the external object to the mind, the process of perception. Now, when this report is sent, when this process of perception happens, now this is where one of the factors, jneyam, object of knowledge. Whatever is perceived, the object that is perceived is jneyam. Now when this jneyam, the object is perceived, what happens next? All of us see a laddu. A laddu is seen, which means a laddu is perceived. The indriya, the eye, sends a report to the mind. Now, all of us have seen the same laddu, but the laddu that when I see, I may love it. Somebody else may hate it. Somebody else may be very indifferent to it. The laddu is the same. The jnayam, the external object that is perceived, is the same. But I start liking it, somebody else start hating it, somebody remains indifferent. Same external object, three different views, the same object, how it is seen. What is the reason for this? The reason for this is my jnana, my dharma bhuta jnana, which is my worldview of laddu, is different to your worldview of the laddu, to your worldview of the same laddu. Because based on my own vasanas, based on my own samskaras, the way I perceive the same object and process it is totally different. Now, step 2 therefore is, step 1 is perception of the jnaya, external object. Step 2 is the same perceived object is processed differently based on my knowledge. My jnana processes the same object differently. Now, the same perceived object can create a sense of attraction, or a sense of repulsion, or a sense of indifference. Now, when there is a sense of attraction or a sense of repulsion, there is an impression that is made in the mind. Now, when the impression that is made in the mind means either it is creating a new desire, or it is strengthening an existing desire of the karta. Now we're coming to the other factor in the triad of factors that motivate an action. We saw jnayam. Now we are seeing karta. Karta is karta because he desires. Desiring is something comes which is natural to us. It is a very unique faculty for all of us. When an object that is perceived is processed based on my jnana, which is shaped by my vasanas, by my samskaras, that same object, the way it impresses the mind is so very different in each and every one of us. Now, in one, it can strengthen the desire for laddu. So immediately, then the mind says, I love this laddu. In somebody else, it can strengthen the hatred for a laddu. I hate this laddu. And in somebody else, I don't care. What is this laddu? Now, depending on my own vasanas, my own samskara, my knowledge changes the way I process. Now, what happens with this processing? We get to step 3, where the karta, the desirer, gives instruction. Now, if the desire for laddu is strengthened, if there is a desire that arises for the laddu, immediately the karta says, I love the laddu, let's go get it. Or, I hate the laddu, run away from it. Or, I don't care, just leave it alone. Now, step 3 in the life cycle of action is, when the karta says, I love the laddu, then the action of grasping the laddu happens. I hate the laddu, run away from it, the action of running away happens. I don't care, doesn't matter, the action of not going near the laddu happens. So the third step is the actual work itself, karma. And how is this karma? Through instruments, karana. The karta desires. And when the karta desires, it gives instruction to the karana of the body. And the body executes the action. And when the execution of the action happens, that is why Krishna says execution of action, again there are 3 factors. Karanam, karma karteti, trividaha, karma sangragaha. Karanam, the instruments, karma karteti. Now, does the cycle of action stop here? Not really. There is step 4. After the action happens, now the object has to be consumed in one way or the other by the senses. Now, the 4th step is experience of the object. Now, in this case of laddu, I desired the laddu, therefore I have instructed my karana to go grab it. After grabbing the laddu, now I consume the laddu. Now, step 4 is I am experiencing the laddu, and there is an impression once again made in my mind again. This impression, I love it. I love this experience. I want this experience to continue. There is an impression that is made in my mind. Now, the jnata who became karta has now become bhokta. Now, as a bhokta, there is additional impression now, which is further strengthening the desire, the vasana in me for the laddu, and the vasana for the experience to repeat. Recording is happening in the mind. This recording is now the seed to give birth to the same action again. That is why it is a life cycle. Now, the desire for laddu in me now, by consuming that laddu, is further strengthened, and now I have recorded that experience of joy. It could be the other way around. For somebody who hates laddu, has been forced to eat, the recording of hatred for the same object is also recorded. Like, dislike, both are impressions, both are vasanas, positive vasanas, negative vasanas. So therefore, again impressions of the bhokta is done. Thus we see the cycle of action here happening. We see the 3 sets of motivators, the triad: jnanam, jneyam, parijnata. The motivation is happening here, and the perception, to the perception there is something added. What is being added by jnana? A meaning. A meaning is given to a perception, because all of us perceive the same object, but the way we interpret the object in our mind is so very different. Each of us give a meaning, our own meaning based on our jnana. Our jnana adds meaning to what is perceived, and that input is given to the jivatma. Perception and the meaning based on the jnana, inputs go to the jivatma. The jivatma gets these inputs, and based on the desire, based on whether it is positive or negative, the Atma commands, instructs the Karana. Because the Atma instructs the Karana, it is the Karta. Why it is Karta? Because it is the one which instructs its own Karana. And once it instructs the Karana, the action is done, and it experiences the result of the action. It is Bhokta. Now, what is important here to understand is the biggest factor which impacts the quality of the action. The quality is the quality of the action, not the action per se. I've told this story many times, but it's important to keep reflecting on it every time we discuss this topic. There was this disciple who approached the Acharya, who used to live on the banks of a river. A sage, an enlightened sage. And the disciple goes to the sage and says, Acharya, what did you do before your enlightenment? The Acharya, matter of fact, said, I used to wake up in the morning every day, do my morning ablutions, do my prayers, then cross over the river, go into the forest, cut trees, fetch wood, come back home, cook, pray, rest. Again in the evening, pray, have dinner, and then go to bed. Okay. Sounds very, very interesting life. Now, what do you do now that you have attained an enlightenment? The Acharya says, matter of fact, I wake up early in the morning, I do my morning oblations, I do my prayers, and then I cross over the river, go into the forest, cut trees, fetch wood, and then I come back home, cook, pray, eat, rest, wake up, pray, eat, rest. The disciple is, doesn't know what's going on. There seems to be no change whatsoever. The Acharya understands, my dear, it is not the nature of actions that you perform, That means enlightened means a transformation in the quality of your actions. The transformation has to come not in the actions that you do. One can continue to do the same actions. One can remain a woodcutter throughout one's life, can become a great jnani without changing the actions. It is the quality of the actions that determine the one's enlightenment or not. So therefore, jnana, the worldview, is very, very important. The way we process what is perceived, the way we interpret, the way, most often we wonder, do I have any worldview at all? Worldview cannot be viewed if we don't introspect. All of us have our own view. It is invisible, but it shapes all our views. Because of our own vasanas, our vasanas determine the scope of our knowledge. And therefore, knowingly or unknowingly, the way we interpret, process everything that we perceive is shaped by our own worldviews. And by design, our worldview is materialistic. And when we are materialistic in everything that we look, then every action by design has to have a material reward attached. Bodily pleasures become the summum bonum of life. And everything has to be a trade, give and take, more take than give. And to that extent that even if we practice religion, it's only seen as a set of rituals where there has to be some business involved. There has to be some business transaction in every ritual that we perform. Why? Because everything, knowledge is only at the periphery of our life and living. We are looking at the body and nothing beyond the body. Anything which cannot be perceived with our indriyas does not exist. Anything that exists only if we can perceive with our eyes, only if we can perceive with the ears, only if we perceive with our tongue. Anything which is beyond our indriyas does not exist at all. So therefore, Krishna, who stands right in front of us, is completely ignored. Because why? Our indriyas cannot perceive him. So therefore, what is that which differentiates an action from motion? Anything that moves can be called either action or motion. A motion is the movement of unconscious things. Whereas when we say action, by default, it has to be done by a conscious being. It is only a conscious being who can act. An unconscious, insentient entity cannot act, can only move. It's only motion. A famous example can be the waves in a river. The water in a river are said to be in motion, where they are inert, unconscious. Whereas a boatman rowing a boat on the same river is said to be in action, because the boatman is a conscious being. What is important to understand is the physical laws of nature apply to movement, motion of unconscious things. They also apply to our actions, but they do not determine the quality of our actions. What determines the quality of our actions? Not the physical laws. The physical laws will impact, but will not determine the quality of actions. What determines? It is the motivation, the triad of jnanam, jneyam, parijñātam. Now, if we take a water snake chasing a frog in a river, this water snake is subject to physical laws. Because why? It is in a river where the water and the wind are subject to the physical laws. But its action is not determined by physical laws alone, because now the snake has the motivation called hunger. So it decides to go against the current, chasing the frog. So which means there is something beyond physical laws which determine the nature of the action. For all living beings, what are the determinants? What are the motivation? Eating, sleeping, reproducing, surviving, defending. For all living beings, these are four common determinants, motivators. Jnanam, Jnayam, Parijnata revolve around these four. But a human being has knowledge which is a lot more expansive than animals. For animals, the Dharma Bhuta Jnana is constricted, is constrained. They cannot think beyond eating, sleeping, reproducing, and surviving. A human being can go beyond this because these are only for the body. For the Atman, there is something more. There is a lot more fulfilling motivation, which is eternal living, everlasting love. These are the real fulfilling motivators for a human being, and that can only come when there is jnana, which is beyond materialistic knowledge. When the jnana matures, progresses from the material to the spiritual, that is when one understands, one gets to know that there is something beyond these four. Otherwise, every action that we do revolves around these four: eating, sleeping, reproducing, and different things. And as long as jnana is constricted, one cannot look beyond. The motivation remains at this level. That is the reason why jnana has to transform. The transformation, when it happens, when the materialistic knowledge transforms into spiritual knowledge, when the center of our worldview is Krishna, then things completely change. Then the real motivator, then the motivation changes accordingly. When this knowledge helps in processing the perceived object, then the next step in the action also gets transformed. What is the next step in the action? The trigger of the desire. When an object is perceived, there is an impression that is created. This impression that is created in the mind either creates a new desire or it strengthens an existing desire. Now, we all like taking the analogy of the car all the time because it makes us understand things very easily. Now, typically we know of cars where if you have to go to a destination, you get in and then you start the car, you start driving it. Over a period of time, we have known that cars have become smarter. Now we have something called GPS in the car. So you start the car and you set the destination and the GPS starts guiding you. The cars have become even more smarter. You can now put them on the auto mode as well. And the car, once you set the destination and you don't need even to drive, the car will start driving on its own. The cars have become smart. And the cars have become even more smart that you don't even need to start the car. You walk, the car opens, you sit, it closes, it knows the destination that you need to go to. Auto drives you all the way. It's become, now these have become smart cars. Sooner or later, the car will come where it itself will grab you. You just have to be going somewhere. It will just grab you, pull you inside. Even if you do not want to go where you went yesterday, it will take you there. It will race you. That day also will come. Now, we are dealing with some kind of a car like that. The car called desire. Desires orchestrate our life. Orchestrate our life, whether we realize it or not. Desires completely orchestrate. They have taken charge of our lives. And the desire first, we activate the desire first, and later on the desire activates us. Step 1, we activate it. How do we activate it? ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः संगस्तेषु उपजायते संगात् संजायते कामः कामात् क्रोधो विजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् विभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशो बुद्धिनाशः बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति. Many times you have discussed this. ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः. Just a little bit of contemplation is enough to activate the desire. Vishaya dhyana. Vishaya dhyana is the easiest dhyana. We have all seen this, right? Dhyana is not difficult at all. We keep doing dhyana all the time. Krishna Dhyana is difficult, Vishaya Dhyana is very easy. So a little bit of Vishaya Dhyana, we activate the desire. The moment the desire is activated, then the desire starts to push us towards indulgence and towards gratification. Now, once we give in to the desire, then the next step is it starts to activate us. Earlier, we needed the object outside, based on which we activate the desire for it. So I see a laddu there, yummy laddu, then I activate the desire for laddu in my mind. Now in the next stage, I don't need the laddu anymore. There are visions of laddu in my mind all the time. Wherever I go, it pops up. Whenever I don't want, I am having a serious discussion, pops laddu in my mind, saying time to eat laddu, time to eat laddu. This is how desire activates us. And when it activates, what it does, it pushes. It pushes us for indulgence, pushes us for gratification. This is step 2. Desires are like, taking the example of a car again, in the case of a car, it is the same fuel which fuels the engine of the car. The same fuel also fuels the front lights. So similarly, the desire determines our capacity to do actions. Our capacity, just like how the engine of the car determines the capacity of the car, the work that the car does. Desires, we should not underestimate desires, because it is desires which determine the capacity of the work that we do. Also, desires not just determine the capacity, they also direct our vision. Just like how the front lights of the car illuminate the path to the destination, it is the desires which illuminate the path ahead, and they direct our vision. You can be sitting here, and if there is a laddu there, my vision is only going to be directed to the laddu. If the desire is so strong, the vision, the desire directs one to that object to the exclusion of everything else. How many times it has happened to us? We become blinded by our desires. We don't see stark reality right in front because the desire consumes us. It directs our vision, and it will direct it towards the object of desire, nothing else. Which means, apart from the list of our desires in this world, nothing exists for us. Our world is nothing but list of our desires. What is not there in the list of our desires does not exist for us. It's not there. It can be right in front of us, does not exist. Our desires direct our vision. Our desires determine the capacity to perform, which means our desires shape our perception. Our desires shape our pursuit. Our desires shape our perspectives. And if we don't manage our desires, these desires will constrict our jnana, our knowledge. That is why Krishna takes up the topic of cultivation of sattva guna. Why? Without cultivation of sattva guna, it is impossible for us to get out of the clutches of this desire. And therefore, then in the first step, we activate desire. In the second step, desire activates us. The third step is the most dangerous step. Desires not only activate us, desires start using us to get their activity done. Initially, we started using desires for our activity. We end up a stage, we are all in the stage where desires use us. This is like the smartest car grabbing us wherever we are and taking us. Yes, we would have gone somewhere yesterday. Today we have to go somewhere else. Doesn't matter. It will grab us and just take us there. Even if we do not want. Same thing is happening to us. Most often our indulgences are happening unknowingly, unconsciously. Just because we gave in to them at some point in time, they have become the DNA of our life and living. And if we really reflect on all our actions today, it will not be a surprise that majority of the actions are being driven. This is what we can call programming, or programmed. Therefore, what is the difference between us and a human being who has the faculty of desiring, who has the faculty of willing, who has jnana that can expand, an perspective that can expand, and animals? In the case of animals, their dharma bhuta jnana is constrained, the scope is limited. Whereas in our case, our jnana can soar. And how will the jnana soar? The jnana can only soar when we cultivate sattva guna. And that is the reason why Krishna takes up. In the next shloka, Krishna says, Jnanam karma cha kartha cha trideva guna bhedataha prochate guna sankhyane yathavat shrutanyapi. From here onwards, Krishna further deeps dive. He does a deep dive into actions. Now, six factors he listed out. Jnanam, Jneyam, Parijñāta, which are the triad of motivators. Then there are three factors. Karanam, Karma, Karta. Now, from these six factors, he arrives at three. Jnanam, Karma cha Karta cha Tridaiva Guna Bhedataha, he says. Now, he is going to analyze three of them based on the three gunas. Why from 6 he has ended up with 3, we may ask. Now if you look at these 6, Jnanam, Jneyam, Parijñāta. Who is the Parijñāta? He is the Karta. Karanam, Karma, Karta. So Parijñāta, Karta are one and the same. Parijñāta, Karta, Bhokta is one and the same. So out of the 6, 2 are common, become 5. Now Jneyam. Jneyam is the object of knowledge, the external world. Now the external world, no doubt, is made of Prakriti, is influenced by, is made of 3 gunas, but they are what they are. It is what it is. There is no transformation we can bring about in the external world. We have to accept it as it is. So therefore, Krishna says, there is no point in analyzing that. Because whatever is the external world, it all depends on how we process it. So, no need to waste our time analyzing the external world. So, he takes Jneyam out. Now, what is left out? Jnanam, Karanam, Karma, Karta, Parijñāta and Karta are the same. Now, Karana, what is Karana? Instruments of action, product of Prakriti, but in this life, we cannot change our Karana. They are what they are. They are products of 3 gunas, but they cannot be changed. There is no point, we cannot change the body. We've already arrived with the body. We have to use this body. It is given. There is no point in analyzing it. Take out Karana. What is remaining? Jnanam, Karma, Karta. Now, this Jnanam, Karanam, Karta are subject to the 3 forces of gunas. How is Jnanam subject? We have seen. The scope of our knowledge, whether it is curtailed or whether it is expansion, depends on the 3 gunas of Prakriti. So therefore, we need to understand how the forces of gunas will impact the knowledge. So, Jnana based on the forces of 3 gunas, we need to understand. Jnanam, Karma. The karma itself changes based on which guna drives it. Sattvika, Rajasika, Tamasika. Therefore, we need to understand the impact of the 3 gunas. And then the Karta, the Jivatma, the one who desires and one who wills. The desire, the will, it is influenced. The scope of desiring, the scope of willing, the nature of desires is influenced by the 3 gunas of Prakriti. So therefore, Krishna says, if we need to understand now how the life cycle of action goes on and how we can perform right actions by cultivating Sattva Guna, we need to now take each component of the action, break it down, understand how the gunas impact, and through that understanding, we develop the awareness of cultivating Sattva Guna, and then we will be in a position to perform right actions, take right decisions, make right choices. From here on, we will see a further deep dive into the science and art of actions. I'm sure no other text in the history of mankind covers such a detailed analysis of actions. That is the glory of Gita. Sarvam Sri Krishna Arpanastu.